So I will just introduce Ethan Kent. I think Hendrik already said something, but I will be a little bit more specific now. So he is Executive Director of PlacemakingX, and Ethan works to support placemaking leadership and impact around the world to grow the global placemaking movement and build a systemic change toward place-led urbanization. So in 2009, he co-founded PlacemakingX to network and accelerate placemaking for global impact, supporting and forming 15 regional placemaking networks. So Ethan built more than 2 decades of experience working on public spaces and placemaking campaign, which Project for Public Space, which was mentioned before by Hendrik, traveling in more than 1,000 cities and towns in 60 countries. So good for you, wow. He has been integral to the development of placemaking as a transformative approach to economic development, environmentalism, transportation planning, governance, resilience, social equity, design, digital space, inclusion, and innovation. So I would just like give the floor to Ethan and then to Japing. I will introduce later.
Well, thank you, Francesco. So this, I mean, I want to figure out how to, make this conversation most useful to you. I mean, I have a presentation, and I'm happy to share it. But I don't want to. I think we have a small enough group where we can also have sort of an adaptive conversation. Should I go through like?
As you wish. It's your time to just say, maybe show some examples or whatever, talk about like this. I mean, we can be flexible on it. No, okay. There's no problem.
Well, I'd love to show sort of the basic slides, of how the placemaking movement's going, and with the lens on how this can help shape your next steps. I think there's a lot of good ideas from this conversation that I can give some structure to, perhaps, on how other communities are following up on events like this, and how we can connect this to the global effort. So let's see. Let me share my screen. So let's see. Can you see that okay? Is that just move this over?
Yes.
Okay. So I mean, I want to sort of share how the global placemaking movement is really based on conversations like this, and based on multi-sector, community-wide discussions that are shaping policy, shaping practice, and shaping a global movement. And I'll encourage. I have been trying to get some Twitter action on these those hashtags too. So we'll, if you feel free, what I do think we, like you said, we want to capture the results of this event, and the key messages, and sort of have something to be able to point to this event as something that is a catalyst to much more going forward. So as I think we saw reflected in this conversation, we saw many different causes and interests coming to this, the shared goal of place, and as you've pointed out, Francisco, place is a sort of amorphous idea of how to, that really challenges us to think, holistically, beyond boundaries, beyond silos, beyond public, private, formal, informal. And in a way, place is sort of it's a limitless value. It's something we can continually add to and compete to contribute to, compete to define. But in many ways, we see the biggest crisis on the planet right now is that people are often competing to take value from place, to degrade it, essentially. And the dominant models of urbanization, of moving traffic faster, of being about objects, not places, is one that is creating this sort of race to the bottom, in a sense. But at the same time, we're seeing placemaking as a process of building up, of not just creating the place, not just building the community, but combining the two in a virtuous cycle. And we see when it happens, it's not expensive necessarily. It's often less expensive. It's often very common sense. It's often done in these shorter term, low cost ways, but we're also seeing how it can put into practice, shifts in districts and in downtowns. How does that virtuous cycle put in practice of making the place, building the community, making the place iteratively, can really shift a local economy, local culture, and a perception locally and globally of an area. So likewise, we often see the need to bring together different departments' interests around a public space. We're also seeing globally people coming to us from leaders of the environmental movement to the, looking at technology and smart cities, to arts and culture, to equity, to health, seeing how a focus on place can help us more fundamentally address those goals and be more resourceful with other sectors. How alone each of these causes, how each of these movements is often perpetuating the paradigm by leading with a set of solutions that may be too narrow. We need a deeper systemic change, and that's what's possible right now. We see right now the future of cities is defined often like this, and people are seeing Hong Kong as through this lens, not through the lens of place. They're seeing through the lens of objects, of sort of a futuristic experience, perhaps. When really, maybe its wealth and its future would better be defined by a more community-based discussion of place, and how buildings like these and streets like these support places and innovation and local culture and human connection. This is Jakarta, but could be parts of Hong Kong. If you lead with the design and development, you get design and development. That's the people's that are creating these. The cities are defining their goals too narrowly around just a building, just a public space, just a park. Even not when we raise the goal to say let's create a great place and then debate what that means and who it serves, it lifts up and draws out the best in many different efforts. So we've gone through an era where architecture, the built environment is defined more by the star architects, by objects, by just a narrow aesthetic. The Bao effect has perpetuated some of this, perhaps. These two men mugged a tourist couple of their camera right after I took the picture. But you go to other parts of the city, it's actually quite lively and comfortable. That the building was more about itself. It would cost less to make this place active and safe. But similarly, traffic and cars have dominated cities. But I know Hong Kong has experimented with a lot of, when I was there in 2006, we looked at all the temporary street closures that New York City is now finally doing. It actually helped inspire a campaign that we led in New York to create the public plazas here. And now we're doing open streets, similar to actually what I saw in Hong Kong on that trip. And again, it's very simple. It's often led by very informal aspects. So we need to make our cities much more informal. We need a full spectrum of informal to formal. We need a full, we need retail and social life that is really informal. The center of public spaces is often, we need to think about how that's the most informal place, but then how as you move towards the edges, often it can get more formal. But the publicness of a space is often correlated with how informal the activity, the social life is towards the anchors of the centers of these spaces. The city we've worked the most in at Project for Public Spaces when I was there was Detroit, and we worked in many contexts throughout the city. But the iconic feature was the most informal space, creating a beach right at the center of the city. The month that the city declared bankruptcy in 2013, and this led this transformation where people locally and globally felt that they could help shape the city. They felt welcomed in the city. It was human again. It wasn't just defined. This area had formerly been defined by just big roads and traffic and monolithic buildings and corporations that were failing, that downward cycle of disinvestment, and has been powerfully reversed, especially in the downtown, through placemaking. And we were allowed to lead the master planning of the downtown through a place-led approach, through lighter, quicker, cheaper changes, not big master planning or urban design moves, actually. But these ideas are applying everywhere. I'm headed to Mexico City in a week or so to help continue to build the placemaking campaign for that city, but has also been seeded by small informal projects. The limiting factor there has often been place governance and participation. There's actually a lot of money and support for urban design, for the projects, for the capital projects, but not so much for the much less expensive parts of it, which is the engagement and the governance and ongoing maintenance programming of space. So we shape our public spaces thereafter, they shape us, often quoted, but it's much deeper than that. Our public spaces are shaping our health, our culture, our participation, how we feel about each other, ourselves. We need to, the deeper crisis is how do we support and challenge people to shape their public realm to more actively and consciously shape themselves, shape their culture, shape their economy. So this picture was taken by my father in Sydney, and of course we've been advocating, and Gale Architects and others have been advocating for this street to be more pedestrian friendly for decades. And I was just there right before the pandemic, and they just opened up the street to people and closed it to cars. Auckland is doing something similar. We have a long-time campaign in Auckland to build the city around lovability, not just livability, the human connection that's there. And then just a few quick images of what New York's like right now. But I think these are reflective of what Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area are maybe happening there and can happen now, as we allow informal life to help reinvent the city, and people to reclaim the spaces and debate what should be happening in these spaces. These are the open streets near where I live in Brooklyn, and they're so simple. The businesses on these streets are doing really well because they organized. The city allowed this. The city actually hasn't put much money into it, but they've just said that these can now be permanent, just this last week actually. And so people are now using the street. They're talking on the street, partially because it's safer outside, but this is something people have craved for a long time. And it's so simple, and people forgot that they knew how to make places themselves, to be able to claim these spaces and contribute to them in very simple, very informal ways. The Dumbo Business Improvement District, the districts around the city that are coming back the fastest are the ones that have organized to contribute to their public spaces. And frankly, there are areas just outside of these that are really suffering. If they're not trying to improve their public spaces, they're not activating them, they're falling behind. And of course, the Chinatown district has done this most naturally and most easily, and it's been a wonderful place to visit. But obviously, the Chinatowns in many parts of the world that I've visited, do placemaking naturally better than other parts of the cities. So just to reiterate, what people are talking about, part of placemaking is debating what placemaking is and who does it, and not letting it be dominated by any one idea, sector, set of solutions, and every part of the world defines it a little bit differently, but we think that keeps it from being co-opted if we network the conversation globally. What's key is it's not just about the place, it's not just about the community, it's about how they support each other. It's that virtuous cycle between them, how it improves human connection, and how it's collaborative, and how it's about creating broader community wealth and shared value in a space. We think there's exponential power for that shared value. The place is about adding purpose and meaning to space, and that lots of people can layer on purpose and meaning to space in ways that are not competing or degrading to each other. So we have a lot of roots. The placemaking movement has roots in the work of Jane Jacobs, William White, people that my father worked with, and I knew a little bit. My father worked with William White on the Street Life Project. That was set up by the Rockefeller Family Foundations, that also funded Jane Jacobs' first book, The Death and Life of Great American Cities. And my father founded Project for Public Spaces in 1975 to put into practice this work, but also with the idea that actually it'd be a short project of getting people around the world to see that we need to include the human element of public space in urban design. The goal was always to build a movement to sort of get these ideas to go viral. Out of that, about 20 years later, we started calling it placemaking. We developed a set of principles and really tools to support communities to do do placemaking themselves. Not sort of us as the expert. The first principle of placemaking is that the community is the expert. Of course, the way we funded ourselves was to be experts sometimes, but now we're trying to shift it. So we're realizing that placemaking innovation is now global, and there's leadership all around the world in innovation that we want to support and highlight, sort of moving beyond consulting on these projects, but continue to ground the learning in projects and innovation around the world. So around 2006, we started to see placemaking as a global movement, and sort of started the learning about how to support that, and we launched it at a series of conferences in 2013, actually with UN Habitat and a Swedish foundation that had a big academic focus. We organized a series of conferences called The Future of Places that gathered people from 100 different countries to make the case for public space as part of the New Urban Agenda and the World Urban Forum leading up to that. So we were able to get, we had 10 key messages on public space that were included in the New Urban Agenda, and to get the Sustainable Development Goal 11.7 on public space. These were all sort of achievements of that larger campaign. And then around 2018, when we started thinking about launching PlacemakingX, we started to see the global movement start to self-organize around regional networks, around regional leaders. And we thought, it didn't really make sense for PPS to be the center of it. It made sense to decentralize it. And so PPS is still going. It's doing sort of consulting more focused in North America right now. But PlacemakingX, we launched in 2019 at a series of events all over the world. In Valencia at the Placemaking Europe conference. We launched it with Ping, who I'll let speak soon, in Kuala Lumpur and Penang at this amazing placemaking week she organized there, all over Australia and New Zealand. And then lastly at the World Urban Forum right before the pandemic in Abu Dhabi, with Ping and others at that event. So the movement was launched, at the 2013 conferences, actually in Detroit and Stockholm. And the key idea was that everyone has the right to live in a great place. More importantly, everyone has the right to contribute to making the place where they already live great. So placemaking ultimately really is about engaging and challenging everyone to participate. Placemaking isn't just the realm of experts and academics, but of supporting and challenging everyone to participate. These are some of the conferences we've helped organize around the world that have helped define, shape the movement, and launch and support these regional networks that are emerging. As you can see, that we really do want to build on the Asian, and the Hong Kong conversation, and network that globally. As I showed you guys before, the Placemaking Week Wuhan Declaration, and there's a whole conference report that I encourage you to look at. Is something we can draw on. We can point to. This was approved by the Wuhan government and UN Habitat, and signed on to, and ISOCARP was part of this, the International Association of City and Regional Planners. But we actually see this as quite inspiring and groundbreaking for getting the movement defined in this way. Placemaking it's defined a little bit differently all over the world, but it is being used in many different languages and often not translated. And again, its fuzziness is, and the way it needs to be reflected on. And I love the way that Francisco has turned it upside down. Is important. We need to continually debate and prevent it from being co-opted by any one set of solutions. But we do see placemaking as fundamental to bringing together so many different causes and solutions. We see, my father organized the first Earth Day in 1970, and I grew up around a lot of the founders of the environmental movement. But the environmental movement isn't accomplishing its goals enough. It was too much about sort of impacting less. We see placemaking is about supporting everyone to impact more, to create a world that we like, that we need. And so here's some of the regional networks that have emerged that are, have websites and are on social media. Each of them have strengths and weaknesses. I encourage you to look at some of those, and we really want to help create one for the Greater Bay Area, for Hong Kong, for the Greater Bay Area, and for China, the mission of PlacemakingX is really this global network. The vision is to make the spaces we live in into places we love, to create thriving, equitable, and sustainable world through the convergence of values, passion, and action around public spaces. That's very much reflected in this conference. And I just want to quickly point out these 3 slides, because I think what I'd like to talk about is how do we develop a campaign together. And we've been supporting citywide campaigns in a lot of key areas, where we think there's sort of 3 key legs to the stool. There's how do we advocate for systemic change and make sure it is systemic change. It's not just a few light short-term improvements. What is the changes in governance and participation and culture that need to happen. We need to tell the story of the successes that are there. Often a city has many successes in placemaking in different contexts that need to be connected and shared, and it needs to be a cohesive narrative to it. But then we also have to think about what is the impact that actually has to happen to grow that, to address the city's big or the region's larger needs. How do we scale up impact beyond just the short-term projects and so forth. So Cecilia Martinez, who was at UN Habitat, she helped us found PlacemakingX and really get the placemaking movement going, saying we're shaping spaces into places. One of the key messages of Habitat 3 for us was these keto papers developed by Dr. Jean Clos, who was the head of UN Habitat, with Saskia Sassen and Richard Sennett, who was a part of this but represented well, and talking about how we need to, public spaces need to have multiple uses, be more flexible, be more informal, that cities are incomplete, more porous, more complex, and that's more the case now than ever, more apparent now than ever, especially as central business districts need to reinvent themselves. This is an opportunity to have people more consciously, more creatively create the ground floors of buildings, as Hans has talked about, to shape the even look at the office space as places that as that can be more changeable, but look at the economy, the culture, the governance as porous, open, something we can participate in shaping. So where traditional planning is about engagement, then you design, then you use, we see placemaking as a continually iterative learning, capacity building process, and that place breaks down the silos of government and different sectors for broader collaboration, for measuring success very differently, for much more energized action and creativity. So just sort of closing here, a quick framework we talk about for evaluating public space is called the Power of 10, but it's also, it can be a tool for developing a strategic plan for action. So we think every place needs at least 10 things to do in it. This is provocative, but it's a way for engaging people, not in design, but in use in the program. The informality, that I think many people spoke about really well, but how that informs and drives demand for investments often in design or and more physical changes. How a destination, we need to define our cities more around destinations and districts, but each of these destinations really succeeds at this human scale of the place. Within each place in that destination needs at least 10 things to do in it. But then how we can really transform how a destination is perceived and participated in around the key destinations. And I know we've done workshops in Hong Kong on the Star Ferry Terminal area. I actually worked on the Hong Kong government buildings, and we applied these principles in those areas. That can be parts of the campaign. We've also worked with Link in Hong Kong on developing the Market City campaign, and my colleague Steve Davies is speaking at a conference in a month or so on wet markets for China, because we've done a lot of work in Hong Kong trying to make sure the wet markets are saved, and we want to continue that. We think that's really the crux of great places, and a lot of the crisis around urbanization is how do we not push out informality, but support it to add to public space, not let it dominate and control public space either. But that issue is fundamental, and I think needs to be core to any campaign discussion going forward. And then, of course, how we link these campaigns globally and share the learning, inspire each other, challenge each other, have us all compete to be the best places on the planet, and so forth. So placemaking times the Greater Bay Area, can have global impact. This is really key. We have a short time frame to really have a huge impact in the next, in the next year or so as this opens up. And it is small groups like this that really can change the world. So now's the time. So we encourage you to be part of PlacemakingX. You can sign up. It's all free. It's to be part of it, an advocate. But we really organize around small groups of people in a city that represent a range of different issues and contexts, to be leaders of a campaign. And we look to work with you to, we can make visits, we can have other events like this, we can connect you to other global events as well. But we want to work with you, in a focused way to build a campaign to lead the placemaking conversation in Hong Kong and the Greater Bay Area. So I will stop sharing there. And thank you. I went on a little longer than I hoped, but thanks for letting me share all that with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ethan. Great presentation. I always appreciate when you go through all this, development, from the starting, how this became really a global movement. I remember we met in Placemaking Week in Amsterdam. So when we came to talk also with Ping, so from that point now, after 4 years, so it's something changed, no? I think it's a little bit, we met in New York as well. I think I remember before everything, we went to eat in a very nice place close to your office. So hope to meet you again in New York, basically, or here, basically. I don't know. It would be nice.
Yeah, I hope so soon. Yeah. No, it's been a campaign already with you talking about this, and this is wonderful to have gotten to this moment. And yeah, we're in it for the long haul, so we're here to keep working with you all and build on this effort.
Yeah, thank you so much. So